There are many books on the midlife transition as a period of profound transformation. But recently I've been reading The Adolescent Psyche by Richard Frankel, which has made me think more about the period of adolescence as a time of profound change. One of the first things that happens at that time is the separation from our parents. It's like there's some further cutting of the umbilical cord, psychologically speaking, going further than our parents' world. I've said elsewhere that I saw my mother close up for a long period of time, and she was one of the beautiful people, really. But she said to me once, you know, you're never going to find someone who cooks like me. And that was enough to freak me out. And soon after that, I moved into the back garage at our place, which was standalone with rear street access, and which gave some urgently needed separation. And then friends from school dropped in and we smoked quite a lot of weed and listened to Pink Floyd, who we thought made music specifically for stoned people or a somewhat errant youth. And I thought Great Gig in the Sky was a religious hymn which could help us soar upwards towards the angels. Have a Cigar instantly turned me into an anti-capitalist. And when I first heard the bells in Dark Side of the Moon, it sounded like there were ancient bells ringing out from a far distant past, and a new epoch was beginning. That's the thing about smoking weed. It makes you start thinking more about epochs and things like that, along with where does the hippie trail actually lead. Anyway, most of it was intuitive and hard to express, but looking back on it now, I would probably say that weed was one way of wandering out of the village and into a more unfamiliar world. Maybe it was a left-handed path into the right brain. Maybe it was kind of a gestalt therapy where there is a foreground and a background. And when you smoke weed, the foreground of what you should be doing in the world of action recedes, and then you fall more into the background of your hidden, teeming unconscious life, which has been repressed. Or maybe I would see it more through some of Carl Jung's ideas about directed and undirected thinking. The modern secular world loves directed thinking and its efficiencies and productivities. But smoking weed is like a left-handed path into undirected thinking and some of the wild reveries, and also into some long and meandering conversations. Anyway, we had some long conversations about 60s philosophy, and we thought Bob Dylan was a genius. But you had to be stoned to properly understand his lyrics. And if you could understand his lyrics, then eventually you would get to the bottom of 60s philosophy. And this was a mystical thing, which sometimes made it hard for parents to really understand. Looking back on it now, I would say it was possible we were swept away by the 60s spirit, swept away by the new spirit of the times. I would probably see it more through James Hillman now and say quite a lot of pure spirit erupted into the world in the 60s. The wandering idealism and creativity of the poor in Hillman language. The adventurous free spirit of the youth in 60s language. The self-exploration, discovery, and experimentation of the long-haired youth. Anyway, we loved the poor spirit, but I was still doing the disciplined work of organising a countercultural library to try and find a language for what was happening, maybe. George Orwell was my main man, mainly because animals weren't meant to be on a farm like that, but out in the wild. Someone should let those animals free. I loved Eric Fromm and his book To Have or To Be, which was probably my first introduction into psychology or adept psychology. And it seemed to be able to bring some psychological grounding into some of those more free-floating, poor 60s ideas. There was also Jack Kerouac's On the Road and Timothy Leary's The Politics of Ecstasy, which were essential 60s reading. And I liked Colin Wilson, The Outsider, which helped to understand something about the romantic outsider who was still interested in the verticalities of the spirit and pushing against the rational enlightenment and the age of reason. That opened something up in me, and that people have been having these conversations for a long, long time. But I mainly want to mention one book, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. I was reading Siddhartha one night, and it was the first time I'd really read something that spoke about a spiritual journey like that. And I came to a passage where it said something like, Gautama chanted the holy word Om. And I'd never heard of that word before, Om. And I said it out aloud to myself. And you might not believe this, but I had an out-of-body experience, or a bodiless kind of experience. And the room became bathed in golden red light, and I merged into an ocean of love. The next morning, I thought, I'm not going to tell anyone at the Claremont Football Club about that. I'm never going to mention that experience. This could ruin my reputation on the street. But after that, there were quite a few synchronistic experiences. And within a few years, I went to India and then went up the mountains in India, so to speak, and had many experiences. And one thing that happened is I gave up cigarettes, alcohol, and marijuana all in 1 week. And this is how I was swept away by the spirit of the times and began an individuation process.